I'm indebted to my noble friend Baroness Hollis for opening it with her characteristic combination of passion and mastery of detail, but also for the contributions of all noble lords who, I think, between them have told the story of universal credit, from the original dream, the plans, the delays, the stumbles, to the reality of the gap between the dream and what now is. My lords, on the 13th of September 2011, the noble Lord Freud stood at that dispatch box there for the second reading of the Welfare Reform Bill and described universal credit as the most radical reform of the welfare system since its invention. He told us it would be simple to understand and access, and assured us everybody would be on it by 2017. He described a seamless system which would ease the passage into work, make people better off, and ensure work always paid, and that UC could lift almost 1 million people out of poverty. My lords, those promises were the basis on which Parliament voted to adopt universal credit. So to ask whether or not the system meets those promises is not to play politics. It is to judge the government by the standards it set for itself. My lords, if any of the noble lords opposite ordered a hire car and they were expecting a Rolls-Royce, and what they got was a battered old Morris Minor with a flat tyre and a broken back window, I don't think they'd be very happy if the company said, "You don't really want to go home. If you wanted to drive, you just get in it and go." My lords, what we're asking for is to the government to deliver what they promised, and that's what's not happening. It also doesn't help, I think, to get into a political game of pretending that tax credits were all dreadful and universal credit is all perfect. My lords, I worked as a special advisor in the Treasury alongside the noble Lord Livermore, and what we were all trying to do is the same thing, to make work pay, to lift people out of poverty and have a system that works for everybody. Let's try to work together to get this right. My lords, the noble Baroness Lady Stroud described what universal credit was meant to do. And of course, in that conception, it was a much more generous system. It had a 55% taper. It had more support. It had full universal support. It was a very different creature. So, my lords, we have to work out what is happening now. But it's been subject to repeated cuts from the Treasury, a point made by many noble lords, my noble friend Lord Livermore in a very, very powerful speech, the Right Reverend Pullet, the Bishop of Durham, the noble Lord Lowe, and many others. My lords, we've heard many noble lords demolish the idea that universal credit, as it's now constructed, always makes work pay. It clearly doesn't, and we need to get to a place where it does. My noble friend Lady Hollis made that very clear. I'm also sorry to say, my lords, we don't yet know if it works in terms of helping people to move into work, because the only evidence that's there was actually in research done before the work allowances were cut, and back in the days when the only people on universal credit were mostly young single people, not those with kids or disabilities, so we just don't know. The jury is out. And as for supporting people into work, well, the idea is meant to be the claimant and their work coach work together to produce a personalised claimant commitment. That was the original vision. But I'm hearing too many complaints about variable quality of work coaches, and the government's own research shows that most claimants feel what they've been given is a one-size-fits-all demand that doesn't meet their circumstances. But, my lords, although the carrots have been taken away, my worry is that the sticks are still there and the government will have to lean on them. We've heard concerns about inappropriate sanctions on universal credit claimants, a point also made by the Trussell Trust. The Trussell also flagged up the problems emerging with the in-work conditionality, because in this new system, getting a job is not enough. If you don't earn enough money in that job to get you off universal credit completely, they can push you to get more hours or a second job, or to ditch your secure job for a better paid job. And, my lords, that's not very easy if you've got kids or caring responsibilities. This system has to work before those sticks are being wielded at people, and I don't think they should be wielded in that way anyway. My noble friend Baroness Donaghy has made a very powerful case of the problems for self-employed claimants. My lords, if the key argument for universal credit is it responds to changes in income in real time, how can it be right to penalise self-employed people who are in fact across a year earning the amount of money the government requires simply because they have good and bad months? That's what happens in business, even if those aren't in seasonal work. Or why can you get penalised if your profits drop one month because you had to pay the insurance bill? My lords, that simply can't work, and I really hope the Minister can address it. But is then universal credit working to lift 1 million people out of poverty? Sadly, as many noble lords have said, it is having precisely the opposite effect. And it's not surprising when we see the levels of cut in supports that have been given in compared to the previous system. CPAG shows a lone parent earning £150 a week on 18.5 hours will be £2,336 a year worse off than under 2010 tax credits. My lords, how is that progress? And we've heard from the noble Baroness Lady Meacher, the noble Lord No, my noble friend Baron Lord Beecham, about the problems for people who have disabilities, my lord, the cuts in the severe disability premium, the challenges of using the system, a point very well made by my noble friend Lord Tewig. And I'm very grateful to my noble friends Baroness Armstrong and Baroness Drake for highlighting the impact on the two-child policy on some kinship carers, despite the vote in this House to exempt them. But, my lords, none of this is going to be offset by the kind of tax cuts that get mentioned every now and again, because as we've heard, they don't help the poorest. Even if the personal tax allowance were increased next week, somebody on £80,000 a year would get the whole benefit of that. A single mum working 35 hours a week during term time wouldn't benefit from any of it because she doesn't earn enough. My lords, the IFS used its gold standard tax bend model to look at all the impact of all the fiscal changes the government's made. And their projections show, unless changes are made by 2021-22, 37% of our children will be living in relative poverty, the highest percentage since modern records began in 1961. My lords, for shame. So then, is the system simple and easy to access? Well, I can need hardly go there from all the stories that we've heard today. My lords, there clearly aren't. Now, I hope very much that the government is going to address the long wait. I'm hoping ministers will remember, I hope that when the bill was going through Parliament, noble lords from all around the House pointed out this was to be a problem. And that was in 2011, my lords. And I'm sorry to say that almost every single problem that's happened in universal credit was mentioned back then during the passage of the bill. The government has had years to address this, my lords, and they've failed to do so. So I hope very much they're listening, but I'm getting a little bit nervous now in 2017. The problems are still here and are not yet being addressed. My lords, the 6-week wait clearly has to be addressed. But that's not a delay, it's a target. It's built into the system. And people simply can't manage, as my noble friends have pointed out, without being able to have support much earlier. And I'm worried about how the system will affect vulnerable people, a point made by my noble friend Lord Cashman and others. I worry too about the implicit consent rule. I'm also worried about what happens by the fact that you have to do this online. My lords, an advisor told me about a man suffering from severe depression who can't leave the house, has no computer or internet skills, and he can't manage an online account. The DWP haven't helped him at all. He's now having his sick notes rejected by the job centre because he has to enter them online. My lords, it's not working. We've heard all kinds of descriptions of chaos, of failing systems, of problems. But, my lords, this has really, really got to stop. The problems with housing alone, mentioned by the noble Lord Kerslake, my noble friend Baroness Warwick and others, will be enough to do that. And my noble friend Lady Andrews described the problems in Wales and in different parts of the country, as the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Durham, have done. My lords, I just worry the government hasn't realised how serious this is. I really don't blame the noble Baroness Lady Buscombe at all, who's been gracious to deal with and has been generous with briefings. But she inherited this mess, and she's simply got to try and help her department sort it out. But I am very worried that the government is complacent about the scale of problems that are here, and I haven't been encouraged by some of the contributions coming from behind her today. My lords, either the government believes that the problems really are not very serious, or else they've decided they're collateral damage, a price worth paying. Either of those, I think, is mistaken, and the second of those is frankly not acceptable. My lords, it's not too late. This system is in very serious trouble. As the noble Lord Cormac said in a very powerful and helpful speech, what happens here is actually human misery, and we need to address it. My lords, I urge the government to take a deep breath now and stop. As my noble friend Lord Cashman said, leadership is not about ploughing on regardless. It's about stopping, pausing, listening to every word said here today, reading 650 pages of evidence given to the Select Committee, getting the system right before pressing on. My lords, that's the very least this country demands. Yeah.